Hello, and welcome to the 5th episode of Season 2 of God in Film, the podcast where a Christian and an atheist dive into the best that cinema has to offer and see if we can find any elements that have parallel with the Gospel or any other Bible stories. I'm writer and man who can turn a straight guy's head, Giles Goff.
And I'm bassist and Warrington's Rear of the Year 2009, Phil Coleman.
And during this time of Tier 3 tumultuousness, we'll be trying to stave off the desire to interfere in foreign elections by raising our film geek flails to analyse Thor, the 2011 film starring Anthony Hopkins, Natalie Portman, Tom Hiddleston and Chris Hemsworth as the eponymous Norse god. Directed by my man Kenneth Branagh, hereafter referred to as K. Brizzle.
Okay.
We'll be looking at a wealth of metaphors ranging from Lucifer and Adam and a particularly convincing Arthur C Clarke quote. Phil, what did you think of this film?
So, when I first watched this film, I remember not being particularly bothered by it. I was just like, this is okay. But watching it again today, I was just like, actually, you know what? This dead good, this. Why did I can't place my finger on what it was that I wasn't so enamoured by. But like, I just love the fact that Kenneth Branagh manages to somehow seamlessly blend Asgard with Earth in terms, it doesn't feel jarring when it switches from Asgard to Earth.
It's
not
really
maybe
impressive, that, isn't it?
It seems to blend so well, and I don't know how he managed it, but he did it very well.
What's impressive for me is that prior to this, we've had Iron Man 2, and I think Hulk. I think that's about right.
Yeah.
What impressed me the most was that this is arguably the biggest risk going for. We're effectively introducing a magical character, and yet they do it with such sort of strength and conviction in their storytelling. I was so absolutely blown away by it. I was really chuffed to see how well this film holds up.
I tell you what, for 2011, best part of a decade ago, and I tell you what, it still looks beautiful, that film as well.
It? And without further ado, let's get into Phil's facts.
Okay, so we've got Thor. It's a 2011 American superhero film based on the Marvel Comics character of the same name. It's the 4th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, MCU, and it was directed by K. Brizzle. Sorry, Kenneth Branagh. After reigniting a dormant war, Thor is banished from Asgard to Earth, stripped of his powers and his hammer Mjolnir. As his brother Loki plots to take over the Asgardian throne, Thor must prove himself worthy. So, when Chris Hemsworth and Sir Anthony Hopkins saw each other in full armour for the first time, Hopkins said, "God, there's no acting required here, is there?" And to be fair, the costume department absolutely knocked it out of the park. It looks mythical, but also they're almost in like space suits. And I just love that. I just think it looks great. According to director Sir Kenneth Branagh, the closing credit sequence was based on images from the Hubble Space Telescope and took 18 months to create.
Really? It's just so sumptuous, that those closing credits, aren't they? You know,
they're just so easy to watch. You just sort of get immersed into it, which is great because it's the end credits. It never usually happens that way. So, director Kenneth Branagh asked Anthony Hopkins to improvise his reaction to Thor yelling at him in the banishment scene. Hopkins agreed, and when the scene was filmed, many of the cast and crew present were sobbing. Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston later said that they had to struggle to keep their composure during filming that scene. Hiddleston later complimented Hopkins, to which he said, "Ken's fantastic, isn't he?"
Hang on, Ken's fantastic.
Yeah, so he's just there going, wasn't that a great decision from Kenneth Branagh, rather than, wasn't my acting brilliant? And I just, it's, how precious is Anthony Hopkins? I love that guy. And he's so talented.
Well, I think I love Anthony Hopkins on another level, because he's Welsh.
Yeah.
We have a limited number of famous, cool Welsh people. So the ones we have, we treasure them, we hold them close in our hearts, you know?
I'm bloody Odin, I am. I'm going to have to go into the Odin sleep now.
That was one creative choice that was rejected quite early on.
Welsh Asgard. Can you imagine? Oh, I'd pay good money to see that. So... Kenneth Branagh has been a fan of Thor since childhood. When Marvel Studios selected him as director, they sent him the complete collection of the Marvel Thor comic series as reference material for the character. I can only sort of retort to that as, I am well gel.
Yeah. Presumably there's like a truck that has to get backed up with all those issues,
mate, like,
you know?
I can imagine he must have had to get it in installments, or at the very least, he's going to have to get a big old shed.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't know how they managed that. But Tom Hiddleston prepared for the role of Loki by going on a strict diet before and throughout filming, so that Loki would have a lean but hungry visage.
Yeah, that tracks.
It really helps his character seeing him sort of, he's almost a bit like a shark, almost, sort of just like looking for his prey, darting around.
That said, out of the two of them, when you think about diet and exercise regime, you're not really focusing on Tom Hiddleston's one, really, are you?
No, to be honest, you see that scene with Chris Hemsworth and he's not got a shirt on, and you just think, oh, God damn it, man. You know,
said there's a brilliant quote from Kenneth Branagh that says something like, whenever he wasn't acting, you just turn around and there'd be Chris eating chicken, you know?
Yeah, no, I did. That was something I was going to... That was a fact I actually omitted. Cause,
oh, sorry. Right.
No, I omitted it from this one because it just that he was on a diet of like chicken, turkey, loads of protein, eggs, cheese, and then for some reason in there it said sandwiches. And I'm just like, protein sandwiches? Or...
Yeah, thanks for that.
A few minutes after Thor smashes the coffee cup in the diner, you can see the truck that Stan Lee was driving pass by the diner. And you can tell because the back half is missing after being pulled off trying to move Mjolnir out the crater. You can see at the background just half a truck just going past.
That's awesome. I'll have to check that out.
Mjolnir is ancient Norse for grinder. The name is derived from a Proto-Germanic form, which I'm probably going to pronounce all of this wrong, so sorry everyone, which is meldunjas, from the Germanic root of melanan, to grind, and melwan is Old Icelandic, also meldir, mjol or mjol for meal or flour, yielding an interpretation of the grinder or crusher.
That's some lovely imagery, that.
Just crushes people,
Grinding,
don't it?
crush. Yeah.
Just lots of grinding and crushing at Frost Giants. So Tom Hiddleston described his role as Loki as a comic book but nastier version of King Lear's Edmund. In the William Shakespeare play, Edmund was the illegitimate son of the Earl of Gloucester, who was jealous of his legitimate son Edgar and tricked his father into banishing him into exile. I can definitely see the comparisons.
It's not an accident that Kenneth Branagh got the directing job for this one, because you need people who can pull off Shakespeare to be able to pull off the kind of gravitas of sort of kings and fathers and sons at war and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me that you can see Shakespeare connotations all the way through. Like that bit where Thor says to Odin, "You are a weak and foolish old man." That's the sort of thing you could see Hal saying to Henry IV in one of the plays. You know, it's all in there.
Yeah, it's got like that huge feeling. Again, the gravitas of it is you only usually see it in Shakespeare and anything derived from Shakespeare. According to director Sir Kenneth Branagh, actually, I should say, this movie's biggest challenge was connecting...
Kay Briz. Let's get it right, Phil.
According to director Sir Kay Briz,
Thank you.
As I'm sure his mum calls him and named him at birth, this movie's biggest challenge was connect to the worlds of Asgard and 21st century Earth. It's about finding the framing style, the colour palette, finding the texture and the amount of camera movement that helps celebrate and express the differences and distinctions in those worlds. If it succeeds, it will mark this film as different. The combination of the primitive and the sophisticated, the ancient and the modern, I think that potentially is the exciting fusion, the exciting tension in the film. And that's a quote from Kay Briz himself.
Did you not think that Asgard looked like it would make for a fantastic retirement community? Given the choice, I'm either going to retire to Asgard or Rivendell from in Middle-earth, because those would be two great places to be.
I see Asgard as a bit like a dead magical Centre Parks. You know, like you go there, you stay in your chalet, and you're like, you know, you can buy extra things. Maybe I'll ride the 8-legged horse today. Oh, I don't know, I've got a booking with Odin first, you know. I sense a business opportunity.
All right. Okay. Yep. So, carry on.
So we're just gonna keep going.
Yeah.
Tom Hiddleston researched Marvel Comics Loki and found him to be a multidimensional character and based his performance as Loki on 3 different actors: Peter O'Toole, enigmatic, reckless persona; Jack Nicholson, edgy and nearly insane persona; and Clint Eastwood with simmering anger.
I can see the Peter O'Toole. I would struggle to see the Jack Nicholson or Clint Eastwood. You know?
The Peter O'Toole I see the most. When I think of Jack Nicholson doing like edgy or nearly insane, I think of like The Shining or him as the Joker, I think.
Yeah,
maybe.
I think when I look at Jack Nicholson for a lot of his sort of most iconic roles, he seems like a character who's slightly out of control.
Yeah.
Loki always seems in control.
Loki's got a plan at every single step, and for that plan he's got several other plans. Like, he's a schemer. So.
Exactly.
Executive producer Stan Lee claimed he'd always wanted to play Odin, but was happy when Sir Anthony Hopkins got the role. And I think you would be.
Yeah.
I know I would. You know. Anyway, that is my facts for this episode.
Your facts absolutely make me smile every single time. Thank you so much for those.
No problem at all. No problem at all.
Now, for our special returning guest, a man who knows more about Marvel than the rest of the internet combined.
Ooh, I know who this is.
You last heard him in our Captain Marvel episode. I will let him introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Matt Heslop. I'm here to talk about Thor from the comic books as well as in the MCU.
Matt, it is so good to have you again. It's really nice to have a returning guest. What can you tell us about Marvel's Thor and how he came to be?
Thor was actually created as a response to another earlier Marvel hero, which was the Incredible Hulk.
Oh, really?
Yeah. If you look at previous interviews, for example, Stan Lee himself was quoted as saying, "What do you do when you have created the strongest human there is?" The answer's simple: make a god. As such, that's how he came. Along with most of them, he was introduced in an anthology series. And the one he was introduced in was Journey into Mystery. The character had such a great following. People loved it. That eventually they went through and Journey into Mystery began to feature more and more stories of Thor, that eventually they retitled Journey into Mystery as The Mighty Thor.
That is brilliant. So obviously we've got Thor in the comic books and we've got Thor in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or the MCU for short. How do they differ?
I personally could easily say that of all the characters that have appeared in the MCU, the character that has been changed the most is Thor, in quite a few different aspects. Firstly, his family. In the MCU, there's Frigga, his mother, Odin and Loki, and Thor. Where in actual facts, compared to the comics, there's a lot more. Frigga is his stepmother, his actual mother being Gaia, the goddess of the earth herself.
Okay.
He's also got more brothers than just Loki. There's Balder, Tyr, Vidir, Hodum, and he also has two sisters as well.
So that sounds almost a bit closer to the sort of mythical Thor.
In some ways, yes. But again, there's differences there.
Okay.
The MCU Thor is actually closer to the mythological legends than the comic books are. And it's quite featured that way throughout quite a lot of things. And so you see this in a lot of different aspects. Obviously as well, in the comic books, Sif, or Lady Sif, is actually more of a love interest than just an unrequited crush. But I can safely say one of the biggest changes is Donald Blake.
Yes.
You've all heard of him.
Well, I mean, we have, but let's explain the Donald Blake thing. See, how would you sum up the significant changes that have gone on there?
Quite simply, actually. In the MCU, we are told that Donald Blake is Jane Foster's ex and is a pseudonym that Thor takes on. In the comics, when we first opened up the first issue he appeared in, we didn't meet Thor. We met Donald Blake, who was a physician who was travelling around and became under siege. And he grabbed a stick, which when he banged against a rock, turned him into Thor. Now, for a while, it was presumed that Thor was just an entity that was sharing his body through the use of Mjolnir, but it was actually revealed that when Thor had been banished by Odin, Odin had stripped him of his memories and created the persona of Donald Blake, which Thor then went on.
I call retcon. I reckon that the Donald Blake personality somehow became inconvenient for somebody in a writer's room somewhere, and they just decided to get rid of that nonsense.
There's actually quite a few people who'd agree with you there.
It is obviously a retcon, but it's quite a neat retcon, isn't it? It gets around a few issues quite nicely.
Yes, of all the retcons they've done with Thor over the years, it's safe to say that Donald Blake retcon was the simplest and seamless one they did.
Yeah, it's nice and elegant. So that brings me to my next question. How has the character of Thor evolved over the years?
Quite a lot, actually. For example, we all know him as a founding member of the Avengers. What a lot of people don't realise is, for example, in the comics, while he was a founding member, he'd only sporadically appear in the Avengers, and it wasn't until the early 2010s where he took a leading permanent position on the team.
That is quite late on that, isn't it?
Yeah, he'd appear for the big crossovers and everything, but it wasn't until, I believe, 2012 where he became a permanent member.
That's because he had his own title, wasn't it? For example, the alternate is true. That's why Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch and Hawkeye were such mainstays of the Avengers, was they couldn't support a title on their own to go off and do things like Thor, Hulk or Captain America, so they end up being regular members of the group.
That's exactly right. But I believe it is safe to say that on top of everything I've said so far. Thor is the character who's shown so much more progression and evolution almost as than other characters.
Okay.
We've seen the titles change. Originally it was The Mighty Thor. We've had King Thor. We've had The Unworthy Thor.
Oh, wow.
Odinson. Not just that, we've seen such a titular change as well. For example, we had, this was, I believe, early 90s. There was a point where they removed the Donald Blake persona completely and had Thor share the body of someone called Eric Masterson. This eventually split and led to a new Thor-based character, which was Thunderstrike. He's a wonderful example of how they've changed it and how they once again went back to, like they had previously, the two entities inhabiting one body.
Thunderstrike's the fellow with the beard and the ponytail, isn't he?
And the mace. Originally, Thor had wanted a bit of time away, so he had granted his powers onto this Eric Masterson. Eventually, as the stories went on, Thor and Eric clash, and it eventually separated with Thor taking back his own name and Eric Masterson taking on the name Thunderstrike after the mace that Odin had made for him.
Gotcha.
This is a similar reoccurring theme with the Thor comics. This is very much how Beta Ray Bill, an alien, came into being. He eventually was given a weapon, Stormbreaker, which is the twin of Mjolnir.
Yeah.
We've also had Throg, which was where Loki turned Thor into a frog, and eventually this frog just developed its own character and still exists today. But
Because of course you do. But that's not the most controversial of the sort of changes with Thor, is it?
no, not in the slightest. And this one will take a slight bit of explaining. In a storyline that Marvel Comics did called Original Sin, it ended with Nicholas Fury whispering a word into Thor's ear. Thor drops the hammer, Mjolnir, and is unable to pick it up. He is now unworthy, which led to a tenure for several years of him being known as Odinson and not by the name Thor, as this was taken up by another character. A character we are all familiar with through the films, Jane Foster, who at the time was suffering from cancer and was refusing medical help, but had picked up Mjolnir and taken on that mantle. And it was such a different breath of fresh air. Similar with other storylines that Marvel Comics did for a good long while. It was, who is this female Thor? With various names being battered around, including Captain Marvel, Jennifer Walters for She-Hulk, Invisible Woman. So many names got thrown around. And Thor actually presumed at one point that it could have been Jane Foster, but fobbed that idea off as he thought it wouldn't make sense, as Jane Foster was far too weak due to her chemotherapy.
Matt, that is all the time we got today. Thank you so much for giving us all that insight into Thor. I've really come away with a lot more knowledge than I had before. That was brilliant.
No problem. Thank you for having me again.
So that was Matt Heslop. Phil, what did you think?
It's like listening to Wikipedia talk. You know what I mean? Like he's just got so much knowledge, and it's just so much of a pleasure to listen to him talk about something he's passionate about. I really like that.
Just a sexy, all-knowing Wikipedia.
Definitely, no, I loved it.
I particularly like the idea that Thor is a reaction to creating Hulk.
It makes a lot of sense when you sort of think about it, because, like you said, if you've got one guy who literally just turns into the strongest thing on the planet and can't actually be shot, for example, then, yeah, I guess you just have to go, well, gonna have to be a god then. Here we are.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. And I like the little retcon that we find out about that was like, he's Donald Blake was Thor all along, not the other way around.
I also quite like the Throg, which is just I've seen pictures of it, like, you know, when you look up like different versions of Thor on Google or something like that, and I remember seeing that and being like, okay, all right.
I think now it is time for Finding the Faith in the Film. So one thing I always tell my students when they're prepping up for their English exams is I explain to them the difference between breadth and depth of knowledge. That breadth is knowing lots of things and depth is being able to know a lot about one thing. And I always tell them, you want to show us depth of knowledge. And today I'm going to break my very own rule because I'm going to give you breadth of knowledge. I'm going to show you lots of different possible little metaphors that I think fit in here. But we've got so many of them, I'm not going to have time to go into any one of them in any great level of detail.
Right.
You know?
I'll try not to go off on one as much as I do this time.
Okay. So I don't think it's difficult to see this film as a redemption story. But in order for someone to be redeemed, they first have to have done something wrong. They have to sin. So I wanted to start off by asking, what is Thor's sin in this story?
How do I put this? He's just really immature. Like he he's quite underdeveloped as a person at the start of the story, because his reaction to the frost giants invading the weapon room and the relic room is really, really sort of like, he's too reactionary and he doesn't think.
Yeah, there's lots of things you could possibly say. You could say he's reactionary, you could say he's warmongering. For me, I think it boils down to pride.
Yes, I couldn't think of the one of the seven. I was just there like, I'll say it, and Giles will say it eventually. He'll get there.
Yeah, that is the format of the show, guys. I wanted to look at another character who was, for want of a better phrase, famous for being proud, and that is Lucifer. Okay,
yeah.
Lucifer being one of the names for the devil. It means the morning star. We haven't really talked about the devil or Lucifer or Satan or anything like that in this podcast. What do you know about him?
Well, obviously, there's lots of sort of colloquial and sort of mainstream interpretations of him, physical interpretations of him as like a red guy that exists in a big fiery place that's underground known as hell.
Yeah.
Like, if you're thinking more of like, what is he or who is he? He's sort of, I always think of him as like the embodiment of all the bad stuff that humanity does, the embodiment of sin. Like, he's sort of like the gatekeeper for the people who don't get into heaven.
Yeah, that's interesting. You sort of dance around. Do you know his origin story?
He's a fallen angel, right?
Yeah. The idea was he's sort of a high-ranking position in the angelic hosts, and he's meant to be exquisitely beautiful, great wisdom, fantastic position of power. Here's how he's referenced in Ezekiel. Ezekiel's an Old Testament prophet, and it says, it's almost like he's speaking directly to Lucifer at this point. He says, "You were the model of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. You were anointed as a guardian cherub." Do you remember we talked about cherubs last week?
Yeah.
This kind of almost like a manticore, or like different things sort of stuck together.
Yeah, of course, yeah. He's like a chimera, I think is what I said.
Yeah. "For so I ordained you. You were on the holy mount of God. You walked among the fiery stones. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created till wickedness was found in you. Through your widespread trade you were filled with violence and you sinned. So I drove you in disgrace from the mount of God, and I expelled you, O guardian cherub, from among the fiery stones. Your heart became proud on account of your beauty, and you corrupted your wisdom because of your splendour. So I threw you to earth. I made a spectacle of you before kings." That's from Ezekiel 28, verse 12 to 17. And we talked about cherubs before, how they surrounded God's throne, Lucifer being a guardian cherub, and also, I don't know if you remember, there was mention about the cherubim being used to guard the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, I think we may have mentioned that. It does ring a bell.
So Lucifer, for want of a better phrase, he's cock of the walk. He is totally awesome, and he starts to think, you know what, I am kind of awesome, and I deserve to be worshipped. I think maybe I should be running the show around here,
What? Second God? That's me. And he's just like, right, yeah. God's just there like, well, we're going to have a bit less of that, Lucy. Can I call you Lucy?
Yeah. I remember a school friend of mine saying that, when he first heard the name, he didn't know the associations with it, and Lucifer sounded like a nice girl's name.
Yeah.
Lucifer. So
like one of my ex-girlfriend's MSN scream name was Lucifer, which is weird because she was also quite Christian. So I've never understood it really.
Naturally. There's another quote where Isaiah talks about it. He says, "How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. How you were cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farther side of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the pit." That's Isaiah 14, verse 12 to 15.
Sheol.
So Sheol is kind of another name for hell.
Right. Okay.
I think it's a Hebrew word. We won't get into this in much depth now, but hell is very sketchily defined in the Bible. It's not given as much detail as you'd think.
I was trying to explain hell to my boss at work, weirdly.
Of course you were.
It just was one of those conversations that came up. But I always think of it as like it's a very personal experience. Like everybody's hell is different because it depends on what you personally would find hellish.
The way it has been defined to me as being a world with a total absence of God. If you think of all the bad things that happen in our world now, if you imagine that they were the only things to happen,
Yeah.
If you took all the good things out of this world and just had the bad things, that's what I picture hell being like.
So Donald Trump's second term.
Don't even.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Don't even. Because for listeners at the time of recording, we don't know how the US election turned out, and we are praying furiously at this point.
Even I am. But I'm having a good old pray right now. Anyway.
So anyway, that's the thing. Lucifer gets kicked out of heaven in the same way that Thor gets kicked out of Asgard, but crucially, Thor gets redeemed. There's even a line from Luke 10:18 where Jesus says, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven," and so it's commonly referenced in a few different things, you know.
Yeah.
So this idea of being kicked out, I wanted to sort of come back to it, and we've looked at the Lucifer connection. You know, because obviously Thor, when we see him in those early scenes in Asgard, everyone's cheering him on. He's handsome, he's strong, he's powerful. And you can see that pride connection there quite easily. Now, again, here comes my breadth, not depth. But I want to think about Thor as Adam, as the first man. Okay. Do you remember the scene where Odin kicks Thor out of Asgard?
Yeah, it's in the Bifrost.
Yeah, it's a really evocative scene.
Beautifully performed as well by everybody in that scene.
Oh gosh,
just absolutely amazing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Now, once Odin banishes Thor, can you remember the very next thing he does?
He banishes Thor, and then he whispers at the hammer, doesn't he? He says, "Whosoever is worthy shall wield the
you're nearly there.
He
picks up Mjolnir and whispers into it, "Whosoever lifts his hammer, if he be worthy, will possess the power of Thor."
There we go.
So essentially what he does is he banishes his son, and the very next thing he does is give him away back.
Yep.
No cooling off period. No, well, I've had a thought and I've changed my mind. It's like, okay, I know I've had to do this thing. I hated having to do this thing. Here's how you get back. I loved that because it reminded me a little bit of Adam and Eve being banished from the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
Okay? Which is an inspiration that Branagh was conscious of when he filmed that scene. So, to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, God finds out they've eaten the fruit from the tree of life, and the first person he turns to is the serpent, who we traditionally see as depicting Lucifer and Satan. And he says, "I'll put enmity between you and the woman, Eve, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." Now, that has been often interpreted as a prophecy surrounding Jesus, that the offspring of a human woman will crush the devil's head, and you will strike his heel. So, essentially, it's saying you'll hurt him, but he'll hurt you way more.
Yeah, I think we might have touched on this before. This rings a bell. Like, it's saying, like, that kind of thing is like, yeah, you're both going to hurt each other, but you're going to hurt him quite a bit.
Yeah, you're going to come out of this much worse because he's going to crush your head, you know?
Textbook example of you should see the other guy kind of thing. You know? Well, I say textbook, Bible.
No, do you know what? That's a really interesting thing because we tend to think of things in terms of good and evil, God and the devil. We tend to give them a level of parity, that they're more or less the same.
Of course.
But it really is a case of you should see the other guy. Like with Jesus, you can kill him and it will barely slow him down, you know?
You kill him, he just comes back just like, bloody hell, that hurt. Just, anyone got any wine? Yeah, that's how I'd feel.
It's not going to bother him that much, you know?
I imagine
so
not.
I thought
no.
So I thought that was really interesting. The next thing I wanted to talk about was, did you hear there's a reference to Arthur C Clarke, the science fiction writer, in this?
At the start of this podcast, yes, I heard of it, but I didn't know about that before. So yeah.
Okay, that's me. So they reference Arthur C Clarke in it, who was a science fiction writer. Arthur C Clarke's third law states, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Now, 21st century thinkers have taken that line and they've just kind of tweaked it and advanced it and said any sufficiently advanced extraterrestrial intelligence is indistinguishable from God.
Interesting.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because that's essentially what they're saying here. They're like, Stan Lee created a bit of a problem by bringing a god into his Marvel universe.
Yeah.
We've talked about Stan Lee in the past, that he's this sort of secular humanist. He kind of believes in God, but he kind of doesn't.
Yeah.
So, and this has caused quite a problem for them over the years of how do you reconcile having a Norse deity when you're going out to a readership of people who are Christians and Jews and non-believers and all other different types, you know? And I just thought it was really interesting the way that they essentially say, well, these Norse gods are really just technologically advanced aliens.
Yeah, because they're not gods, they're from Venus. gods. There you go. It's just like, well, okay, right, cool. Well, that clears that one up then, But there's a point when Thor is explaining to Jane Foster the 9 realms, and he's drawing in the notebook and that, and he says, I'm paraphrasing this, but something along the lines of, you people might see what I do as magic, and you study science, whereas for us, it's one and the same thing. Yeah. So there's like a bit of a nod to it there as well, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and this is something that we've touched on in the past, the idea that, or at least, again, we might be dipping into Giles' Christian headcanon.
Yeah.
That I tend to think that science and theology are like two hands reaching out to something from opposite directions,
Yeah.
And I find that stuff absolutely fascinating, because if you could prove that there was a God, then we would be into scientific territory. You would have to describe him as being some kind of extraterrestrial being, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that would be.
I don't want to go too far down this road, because sooner or later, I'm pretty sure you end up in Scientology country. But I do think this is something we should definitely come back to at some point in the future.
That's the kind of country where you think, you know what, I wish I hadn't got through the border on this one. Oh boy.
Absolutely. And do you know what? The funny thing was, like I said, this issue of how do you reconcile a god in your stories is a really interesting one. Do you know, I actually dug this out. Marvel Superheroes.
My word.
So it's a British reprint of American stories, and this comes from September 1980, so nearly 3 years before I was born. The Avengers are fighting Ultron, and there's one point where they're taken into a convent, and there's this brilliant bit here where Scarlet Witch says to Thor, "You seem a bit uncomfortable, Thor." Thor responds, "I wonder, verily, this house of Christian worship hath no regard for the Asgardian god of thunder." And Wanda, Scarlet Witch, kind of looks at him and goes, "Should it?" And then Thor responds with, "Nay, milady, even my father, mighty Odin, who is called all-powerful, doth lay no claim to supreme divinity. Yet 'twould seem that many mark my very existence as an affront to this edifice." So it's this really interesting idea that they're trying to say, yeah, okay, I'm a god, and my dad is like king of the gods, but he's not the god, It's not...
Yeah. You can have gods in the sort of more like terrestrial term, but you can also have gods in the divine term as well. I also I love the way that Thor talks in the comics.
Yeah.
It's just so just kind of like, oh, doth hath blah de blah hath doth, and it's just like, wow, you are so pretty.
Two more things I want to talk about. Can you remember the big shiny metal thing that comes to kill them all?
Oh, the big living suit of armour that's just full of fire.
Yeah. Do you remember what it's called?
Absolutely no. I don't think I actually heard what it was called in the film.
It's called the Destroyer.
Oh, right. Well, that was a lot more bloody simple than I was expecting.
It does what it says on the tin,
That's so embarrassing. Oh, my God. I did not realise. Anyway, sorry. Come on.
Sorry. So the reason why I thought that was interesting is that if we go into the book of Revelations, which some crazy stuff goes down in that one, we're talking end of the world territory.
Revelations be cray.
Revelations be cray, and it ain't even no thing,
I love that.
So there's a character in it who in the Hebrew he's called Abaddon.
Oh, yeah.
And in Greek, he's called Apollyon, and it translates as the Destroyer.
That's interesting. I like that. So I guess Furnace Face was taken then.
Yeah,
probably, yeah.
But it's the thing I like about this film is just these light touches, these little things that just sort of point to some more theological things. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I like the fact that, even just through translation, you can have these little links and that. And I've got to say, just as a little note just on the film, I love the design of the Destroyer. Just something about it, it's just so simple, but almost completely like inhuman, robotic almost. It was just
almost elegant in a
way.
Yeah,
kind of beautiful almost.
I didn't think the metal bum cheeks were needed, if I'm honest.
No, there are some things that should be omitted from life in general, but we've got to take what we've got. You know what I mean?
The last thing I wanted to talk about, and we're going to stretch it a little bit because this is something that happens in Avengers Endgame. And if you haven't seen Avengers Endgame right now, you might want to pause it for a few minutes. You might also want to consider your life up to this point if you still haven't seen Endgame. Like, oh my gosh, what is wrong with you?
It's only the biggest cinematic event in modern history, in cinema history, actually.
To give a very quick précis, to give a very quick summary, Mjolnir is destroyed in Thor Ragnarok. he gets a new weapon, Stormbreaker, in Infinity War, and he gets Mjolnir back through time travel in Endgame. And there's that wonderful moment where Thor, who has been battling post-traumatic stress and depression, all these things, he gets the hammer back, and I think he says something like, I'm still worthy. And that always makes me smile, because I think there's usually two types of people when it comes to God. I think there's people that think they don't need God, and there's those that think they don't deserve God. And when we talk about worthy, we never really establish what the worthy is. What are you worthy of? What is being worthy of Thor? But I think it works well as a nice allegory for being worthy of love, being worthy of acceptance.
Yeah.
I think it's a really strong message to say that depression doesn't make you any less worthy of love, and it doesn't make you any less worthy of God.
Yeah, depression is, as somebody who's been suffering for it for a very long time, I say suffering from it, I live with it, but it's one of those things where it makes you think that every action that you do makes you a little bit less whole, and makes you feel as though the things you're doing aren't worth anybody's time or even your own time. And really, that's signals firing your brain that aren't firing the right way. It's not a truth. It is your actions.
It lies to you, I think.
It does lie to you, and I think the important thing to remember is that it's your actions and it's your sort of the path you take in life that really matters, and how you take care of the people around you and the people closest to you, and how you take care of yourself as well when you're not being lied to by your own bloody brain. And let me tell you, you think you can trust your brain, but sometimes you can't. So
depression doesn't change anything. You are still worthy of love from God and anyone else for that matter. You know?
I agree.
Okay, guys, we're going to leave it there for today. Listen, thank you so much for listening. I've really enjoyed doing this one. Our next episode is going to be on Hacksaw Ridge, so please check that one out.
Whoop, whoop.
Phil, have you had a good time?
Absolutely, especially when it comes to talking about Marvel films, because they're just a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, listeners. We will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
God in Film is hosted and created by Giles Goff and Phil Coleman. Mixing by Phil, editing by Giles. Our logo was designed by Julie Walsh, and our theme tune was composed by Rick Lee. Waffle editing by Natalie Austin. Fact checking by Christina Stannard Good. God in Film is a Dask production. Please rate and review, unless it's a 1-star, in which case, create an award show. Tell Giles and Phil they have been nominated for the Best Podcast Featuring Giles and Phil award. Invite us along, we'll get dressed up all fancy and give interviews on the red carpet, and then when the winners are announced, you give the Giles and Phil award to Kermode and Mayo, because reasons.